right, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris, for this invite. I've been looking forward to it. And thanks everyone for joining the session. So my name is Nicholas, as you can see. I'm currently with Living Goods as the Director for Talent and Capability, mainly looking after all aspects of talent management end to end. Right from talent acquisition, areas around succession planning, learning and development, performance management, all pulled into one. And Living Goods is an international NGO, quite mission-led and primarily focused on community health systems strengthening, where we do save lives at scale by supporting digitally empowered community health workers who deliver care on call, and then therefore making it easy for families to get the care they need whenever they need. Our vision is to envision a world where every family can access the healthcare they need, not just to survive, but to thrive. So highly mission-led, quite progressive. Our presence now is started off in Uganda 15 years ago. We're currently also in Kenya, running operations there. We've just recently opened up Burkina Faso, which is the French West Africa, which is part of our expansion strategy into West Africa. And is the larger East Africa as well, based out of Nairobi. But then we also have distributed teams in the US, some in the UK, and we have other people working remotely as part of the larger team at Living Goods. So thank you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. And Chibuzo.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon again from Nigeria. I hope that you can hear me. Yes. Okay, my name is Chibuzo. I did people and culture for Bankly. Bankly is a fintech. I'm currently running a microfinance bank, and everything around payment solutions, payment infrastructure, APIs. I head people and culture, so strategies end to end around people, from recruitment to training to performance, to everything that has to do with people management. And at the core of it is building a culture for the business. So that's what I do for Bankly, and that's what I do even outside Bankly. And I look forward to the conversations that we're going to have today. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And we'll go right into the first question. So we only have 2 discussion questions. Each panelist will have a chance to unpack their answers, and we can also, create the space for the questions from the rest of the group that's joining us live. So if you have other comments or double-click questions on these 2, feel free to chime in the message thread. So the first question, since we are in January, the focus really is around annual planning and how we can be intentional about learning and development, and obviously within that leadership development within the companies that we are a part of. And the discussion question really is, first, how do you and your company approach annual planning for your learning and development activities? So Chibuzo, would you like to kick us off, and then we'll go over to Nicholas?
Okay, so how does my company, which happens to be Bankly, plan for learning and development? So at the core of it is, it starts from the retreat. So we have like a managers retreat the year before, right? So planning for 2023 already started in 2022. And a couple of things that are considered for that planning is, one is the business goals, right? Then performance, So we don't plan for learning and development till we've had like the last quarter performance appraisals. And so once that is done, and we also have a retreat for the business goals for the succeeding year, then we can have a learning and development plan. Because if we can establish where the company is going, if we can ascertain the skills, the knowledge set, of the employees, then we can plan. What exactly are we planning? So yes, so regardless of where employees are, and regardless of the skill level, the knowledge level, it all boils down to business goals and performance. So that's how we actually plan for learning and development.
And just to dive a little bit deeper into that, I have two follow-up questions.
Okay.
We won't let you off too easy. The first is there anything about how your company approaches annual planning for leadership or learning and development that you would want to improve upon? You kind of describe the high-level process. Is there an element of that you feel like your company or you as a leader within the talent team you want to improve upon? Yeah, I'll pause there.
Okay. Yes. So I'm going to sound a little bit biased, but the core of who I really focus development on, where I could say that the business try to improve these processes around L&D is with the managers, because we realize that even if the people underneath are growing and the managers are not getting better, they're not learning, they're not developing, it's like a glass lid over the employees, because they don't have direct access to management as much. General meetings, things that contribute to the overall business goals, is still the managers that come. So one of the ways that we decided to improve on our L&D is to look into the managers. I think we had a session just before the end of the year called leading yourself and leading others, because sometimes emphasis is on leading others and then forget that for them to also have the capacity to lead others, they have to lead themselves first. Self-awareness courses, working on areas of improvement and all that. So that is one way that we improved in our L&D this year.
And you mentioned kind of the retreat that you went through at the end of last year, and how that has informed the business objectives for this year, and then that informs your L&D activities. For both this year and in previous years, have you found that learning and development and people-related items tend to be on that first line of business objectives, or are often they're a secondary item?
Okay, so I went through a session last year, and one of the questions I heard, which I took back to management, was, when we say people are our greatest assets, where are they on the balance sheet? That was the one-liner for me. If we're the greatest assets, where are they on the balance sheet? Right. So I took that particular statement back to management, and I was like, okay, where are we on the balance sheet, right? If we're the greatest asset. But I'd say that the employees are important, but I wouldn't categorically say that they are on the first line of the budget. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that the employees are the first on the budget, because it's a combination of both the process and the people. That's what the business is about. So we talk about the North Star, we talk about the numbers, we talk about how to get the numbers, and then we talk about how to develop the people to get the numbers. So I'd say people are important, but on the list, they come second.
Great. And I believe you mentioned about trying to get a sense of where your team is at in order to inform your priorities. So how does that process factor into the annual planning approach? So there's the retreat with the business objectives, but there's also the kind of assessments of which skills are needed. How do you build that process into your annual planning?
Okay, right. So the performance comes before the annual planning, right? Before the even before the business retreat, because um, once we ascertain, okay, it's like a review of the previous year. It's like a review of the previous year. So if we had a target and I had a performance appraisal at the end of the year, so I have two performance appraisals, mid-year and end of the year, but then I have like quarterly reviews, right? So at the end of the year, I'm doing an assessment of the performance over time and all the investments done. And I'm saying, okay, if these are certain skills and certain knowledge gap that should have been filled over time for my people, how come we've not achieved it? What do we need to get to where we wanted to do? Even if we have gotten there, how do we get better? And by the time we're done doing that, it now influences the kind of programs we either pass people through, or the kind of courses we pay for, or the kind of, anything that has to do with learning and development. So we carry that feedback into the business retreat. So in the business retreat, where we are now analyzing generally as a company and forecasting for the new year, we're saying, oh, based on performance, we're able to achieve this certain percent. But then if we increase, the kind of learning and development that we are invested in, we can get to this point, and then we can build a budget, and then the business can articulate it and then present it to everyone as the general budget. So that's how it goes. So performance, the retreat, then the general budget.
But would the budget for L&D actually fluctuate based on those steps, or is it more, a set budget and based on what you learn, it's just how you actually spend it?
It's not a set budget. It fluctuates actually, because by the time you realize that, where you even thought this person needed help, it's not where the person wants, then you can reiterate, and from there it fluctuates. It's not set. It's not set.
All right. Thank you so much, Chibuzo. You're off the hot seat for now. We'll turn it over to Nicholas, who can also share about how he and at his role at Living Goods goes about annual planning for their L&D activities. Nicholas.
Thank you. So good question. So part of our strategic objectives, which usually looks at the bigger picture of where we want to be as an organization in the next 12 months, is strongly supported by organizational capability, because without which some of those key business drivers we are not able to achieve. So that's where we start. So that's really our why when it talks about learning and development. So look at the bigger picture. What are those key business drivers, and what do we need to do to achieve those business drivers? Then now we drill down onto then how do we do this? So we get into an exercise of clarifying what are the key priority areas based on the strategic objectives that we must address, and in what phasing, looking at both functional and the leadership competencies. So for instance, we look at, if we identify 3 key areas that we need to focus on in the first quarter, then we identify the other 3 maybe for the second quarter, depending on the priority and also on the need at the time. And then secondly is looking at how do we then prioritize. So that's right, in terms of what comes first, in terms of, what's more immediate. And we would categorize that as a fix-it. So say project management is really core to the delivery of our program team for the field operations. Then you categorize that as a red. It needs to be fixed immediately. Say communication is not a very big deal. In some quarters it's struggling, but it's generally okay. Then you categorize it as make it better. Same for, others. So you can see how we then categorize based on the level of priority which is needed. Now, once we finalize that exercise, then we go into the actual annual planning, which then now involves going much deeper, trying to get more deeper insights, working with the various country teams and the leadership teams getting involved to really tell us, where are the real pain points with their teams, and where are the gaps that, if we are able to fix, then they'll be able to deliver on what they have promised the business. So we look at those insights. We do some bit of assessment with the teams. We look at the individual development plans that, of course, would have come out from the end of year performance review for last year. So we sort of analyze, what are those key gaps that were called out, both at an organizational level, but then also which are those skill gaps that tend to cut across, most groups of people. And then we pick that, and then, of course, we form focus groups to really just prioritize, what is the one thing that we really need to get better at as an organization this year to really address the key growth that we want to see, or to really be relevant, that's really relevant to our strategy going forward. So for us, it's really a 3-step process. Like I said, first of all, define what capability requirements are needed, ensure that they're aligned to the country's strategic priorities, then, scale that up now to the org-wide priorities, and then, look at prioritization and sequencing as a second process. And then thirdly, develop now the capability solutions. Capability solutions here now we're looking at, for each of the gaps identified, what do we need to do to support now the learning for each of them? Do we need to, depending on the need, do we need to, we sort of apply a 70-20-10 approach, where you may realize in some areas you don't need to have to send people to class, or in some areas you may need to assign some courses to the various teams because it cuts across that particular team. And in such a case, then we leverage our e-learning platform to assign those courses. In certain cases, you may need to apply a bit of coaching. Say you have identified a group of individuals or some people in your leadership team who you want to really accelerate their growth, especially for purposes of succession. Then you get them into a coaching engagement. Or there are people, say, at junior level or entry level, you want to get them into some level of mentorship on whatever area that has been identified. Then we bring that particular intervention on board as part of that planning. And then, of course, we have, once we sequence it, then we know when is it happening, how is it happening, who is doing what, and do we have the budget for it? Now, that's the other conversation. So we have mapped out the plan for the year. The next question is, what are the budgetary requirements for us to be able to deliver on that particular intervention? So then we look at that. Do we need to maybe identify local vendors who are more cost effective? Do we need to identify probably, other vendors who are probably not locally based, but can still deliver some value remotely? What really makes business sense for us based on the need that we have identified. So if you look at that, we have a 3-step process, that helps us to map out that particular plan for L&D for the year.
Amazing. Thanks for taking us through that, Nicholas. I also have some follow-up questions for you, so I hope you don't mind. I liked how you described this 3-step process and how you also look at things through almost a scorecard lens and evaluate how different teams are doing. And you also mentioned how Living Goods is a fairly large NGO with a footprint across the continent in many different countries and regions. And so my follow-up question is around, you said you set an annual plan and an annual budget. To what degree is that decentralized across your different operations, and what role do you play on the global side versus the local side? Because I imagine that each of those country operations you mentioned, I think you just launched in Burkina Faso. How do you make sure that you're being aware of the various stages that each of those countries is at? Because I imagine if they just launched, 3 months ago, maybe they're in a totally different headspace than your, Kenya operations. So I'm curious how you balance that
Yeah.
with a large and sprawling company.
Yeah. So we have sort of a balanced approach, so more or less like a bottom up. So we start off with the country operations, go each country by country, and really drill down onto the needs and the areas that we need to really focus on as part of our planning. And then map those out, have sort of conversations with the team, the leadership team there, identify those areas, then, put them on the table. Then we move to the next, country or operations, and then we put that on the table. So my role is really just to consolidate all those areas that have been identified, the needs that have been identified, and then bring them on board, and I look at each and every opportunity to be addressed and identify areas of priority. Now, I may have 10 areas of need that I need to address. Some of them may not be as immediate. Some may be, probably we may be able to push them probably by a quarter or 2 months on, but then we fast on the real immediate issues that are affecting business delivery. And then we look at then the budget. So the budget here is done at a global level, so that we have one pool of funds that then addresses each of the countries where there is need at any particular time. So we consolidate all that bottom up, and then we just have one pool that we use every year. And of course, we keep on evaluating the effectiveness, analyzing, are we always over budget, and why are we always underutilizing what we have, and what is really pushing that, or are we underutilizing the resources we have, but then we are not really making the changes we need to do when it comes to capability upskilling.
Amazing. And so one more follow-up, and I'll ask the same follow-up to Chibuzo about her work at Bankly. There's Living Goods and Bankly have different funding sources, to my understanding. Bankly is probably venture capital funded to some degree. Living Goods is both revenue and donor funded. Please correct me if I'm wrong in either case. I'm curious if the funding sources come with any kind of strings attached as it pertains to learning and development initiatives. Nicholas, I'll start with you.
Yeah. So we're purely donor funded. And usually what we do is that we start from a clean slate, and we need to really justify the why. And as I mentioned earlier, our organizational capability is really tied to the core of the organization, which is really the strategic priorities. So we really have to show the connection of what we are budgeting for and how that is connected to the bigger picture of solving the problem, of getting us to where we need to be. So that's a real starting point for us. And there are really no strings attached. I mean, for us at Clean Slate, we have to just keep it within reasonable limits. One consideration for us is that we've already invested quite a bit in our in-house learning platform. So, we prioritize that as much as possible to really leverage the learning platform that we have internally. Because if then people are not, utilizing that particular resource enough, which is already an investment in itself, then there's no way we're going to justify for extra amount of money to take people to, other, schools or whatever interventions we need to get out there if you're not, using the internal resource that we have optimally. So we start from within, then we see, where do we still have the gap that we cannot solve in-house, and then look at, our budget lines along that line.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's super helpful context. Chibuzo, how about you? Any strings attached from your investors on how you go about L&D spending or even strategy?
To be honest, there are no strings attached, right? Everything ties down to, like I said, is the business goals. So whatever investment that has been made at whatever level, should be justified. Even beyond that, even just beyond answering, maybe your investors, and we try to utilize resources internally. So for every training project that we have, we always try to target train the trainer, right? So we save the resources by, going all out just to ensure that we get that resource into the company and then keep passing on that knowledge. So we keep having sessions where the trained will come to train others. So that way, it's the resource is still within and we can justify, right? So if I'm saying to an investor, I'm saying to the board, I spent this X amount in training this, and they're looking at it, it's exorbitant. And I'm giving a breakdown of how much more people will be trained down the line just with that single resource, right? So that way is justified. So there are no strings attached.
That's great. Great to hear. So we'll move on now to the second discussion, the second and final discussion question. And this will be a bit more about what are those priorities that you're seeing based on the process that you guys have gone through. Maybe you're still in the middle of fine-tuning that, and obviously there's adjustments that happen throughout the year, but where you're sitting now and the work that you've done to think about the year ahead, what would be some of the top specific projects or themes that you're seeing will be a big part of your learning and development strategy this year in 2023? Chibuzo, would you like to kick us off?
Okay, so two priorities I can say here and now. One is a lot of emphasis on the managers, right? And it's not just at the hard skill level, because the managers are top level, employees. So even before they get into the role, we expect that you have certain level of skill. So the skill at this point is really not even the challenge, right? So there's a lot of emphasis on the soft skill, managing people. We talk about attrition rate in the company, and a lot of people come back to HR and say, oh, you lost 15 people in this department. But when you dig down and drill, you see that it's the management at the departmental level. So just to ensure that we curb that, there's a lot of emphasis on, emotional intelligence, soft skills within the managers, right? Just how to generally manage people, how to, help people grow, because sometimes everybody just keep looking at the HR for development of the company, but their managers also have a role to play in developing the people that they are leading. So that's very top priority for us in 2023. The second thing is data analysis. Considering that we're in the fintech space and an arm of our business is agency banking. So we have agents across Nigeria and we have loads and loads of data, because these guys are doing transactions daily. There's volume counts, there's value counts and all that. So there's a lot of data. But what happens is that most times you are blindsided because you have a large set of data. But then I want to know how many people are performing 5 transactions daily, 2 transactions across weeks, across months. So we realized that it's not even just having a data department, is data intelligence across all departments. So priority for us was Power BI training at the beginning of the year. So there was nomination from each department, every department across, on data analysis, how to understand data, so that we can build dashboards that, even if I'm an HR, I know how to look at data to make decisions, even if I'm customer support, even if I'm in a reconciliation or tech. So that was top priority for us. So front face based data, you can look at and see, this is what is going on in this department. We can present the general information happening in the business on a data level. So that was also another priority. And like I said, train the trainer. We send people to go and train, then they'll come back and train the rest of the team. So those are the 2 priorities for Bankley 2023.
That's great. It's good to see both the soft and hard skills, and the data makes a lot of sense, and interesting that you were able to pick kind of the trainer across the different teams to participate in that training. Thanks so much for sharing, and I'll move over to Nicholas to hear more from him on how they approach their priorities and their projects for this year across their different teams. I imagine there will be a lot of themes, but maybe if you can pick just two or three that you've seen stand out so far.
Yeah, so what stands out for us, I think like Chibuzo's case, I think a big priority now is upskilling our people managers. And I know this is something that is cross-cutting for many sectors, not just in the non-profit, but even in the private sector. Because, if you have a strong people management pillar, then the rest of the execution falls in place. And then people are then really ready to get to the next level in terms of lifting their own teams and also lifting the business. So as much as they lead self, they also lead teams and they lead others. So that's a big priority for us. And we are currently, putting together, building blocks for that, just to make sure that we are fully well set up for it. Of course, in that pack for people management, there's so many units or areas that we need to focus on, whether that is around, is around performance management, managing accountability, feedback, or areas around, just general communication. So there's so many aspects onto that people management. So it's a full pack. As a big second priority for us, because we are still a young, mature organization, young and maturing at the same time. There's a lot of changes going on in the organization. We are moving into new territories, into new countries. We are expanding, our portfolio quite fast. And, since we're also leveraging a lot on the technology side, then there's a lot of changes, going on. So we are focusing a lot on change management and really how to lift our teams to be better change managers, and especially our frontline, to really just have a better way of managing change whenever it comes, whether that is in terms of both anticipating for change and also effectively managing the change as it comes, with very limited disruptions to the day-to-day and to the business operations. And then thirdly is really part of the core of our organization, which is really around fundraising and business development, because I think we are all aware that we are experiencing a huge, global recession, and most funders and donors are, slowly but gradually retreating or not promising much going forward. So we're trying to find, what other creative ways can we build a solid, fundraising team who would probably help us see or, figure out, other ways or other channels that we could leverage, beyond just the traditional funding channels that we've always used. Because that's really core to our business. Because without this particular team, then most of our key strategic priorities cannot be delivered effectively. So those are the three areas that we are focusing on this year. And of course, there are a couple of others that, of course, will be, picking up from these three.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I think Nancy has a question, so I can read that out. And Nancy is just checking where she's working. She's working in Kenya at, I believe, or Vision Fund International. And she's asking, she's describing that she uses a bottom-up approach in collating the learning needs, and it's working quite well for them. So her question to you, Nicholas, specifically is, do you have tools to help you standardize impact assessment? And are those tools country specific? And if others have questions, please join Nancy and you can type them into the chat here, since we'll be using the remainder of the time to just do follow-on questions before we close out.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Nancy. Yeah, and I agree with your bottom-up approach. I think it's very effective in identifying those needs. In terms of the tooling, so there are two. So particularly from the individual capability needs, we have a development planning tool that usually is rolled out at the beginning of the year when we are doing a goal setting, so that people are able to map out their focus need areas. Of course, then you have a conversation with your line manager, just so that you can firm those up. So that is one tool that we use, and we try as much as possible to make it as detailed and comprehensive as possible, so that we are able to capture all the details from the word go. And then the second one is what we call the people capability matrix. So the capability matrix is one that we use to map out first of all is the identified needs, the phasing or the sequencing of those particular needs, the particular skills that need to be developed, of course, by when, and then the actual intervention itself. So we call that the people capability matrix template. It just helps us to standardize and some of these areas that we have identified in a very summarized version that helps us with quick follow-throughs, and of course keeping ourselves accountable, and especially with the core talent team that's responsible to help with identifying some of those solutions. Of course, partnering very closely with the heads of functions, because for us to identify areas of priority, we would definitely need their input. And then the final thing that we did that's very important is constant review of that plan. So every quarter we go back and sit down and say, hey, okay, are we on track? Are we off track? This is what we had mapped out at the beginning of the year. Where are we seeing any shift? First of all, is this making any difference with this particular intervention, or should we change the intervention itself? If it was at this particular coaching program where we nominated, say, 5 people, and they've been on the engagement for the last, say, 3 months, and as a manager, I'm really not feeling the difference, or I'm not seeing the actual outcome of that. How are we measuring it? And does it really make sense to still keep them for another 3 months, or should we change the intervention altogether? So those are the questions we ask ourselves when we're doing the review of the plan itself every quarter, just to make sure that we're on top of things and we're not dropping any balls as part of that planning. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. Chibuzo, I'd love to hear in a similar vein, you mentioned how you're rolling out some of the manager EQ training and also the BI data training for some of the staff. I assume this will be over a number of months. How are you thinking about measuring the results of that, and how you would decide whether to expand that or continue it, or if you deemed it a success? Sorry, you're still on mute.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so how we try to measure the success of whatever training that we've engaged in is first understanding the key result. Right? We know that it's an objective, or we want to understand data and see data, but then key result is at the end of the Power BI training, we should have 5 dashboards, right? Measuring failed transactions, measuring. So the key results are specific, clear before the training happens. So when training is done, there's a period of at least, depending on the result set, there's a timeline. And then there's an assessment in between, halfway into the timeline. We say in the next 1 month, we should be able to have a dashboard that clearly shows us all failed transactions at the end of the day. And we decided that this is going to happen for the next 1 month. 2 weeks, there's an assessment. How far have we gone? Have we, are we even there? And all that. And at the end of the 1 month, which is a realistic timeline to be able to achieve that key result, we put it side by side. Okay, do we have a dashboard now, which was the objective in the general, but the key result was to be able to measure failed transactions. So can I now see and verify the data that this is giving me failed transaction? So whoever built this Power BI, whoever built this platform can measure this. So it's the key result versus the final product. If we do that and we have an assessment and say, okay, it was able to deliver, we can now ascertain that, oh, this was a viable process. But if at the end of the month, the timeline, it wasn't able to do what it was supposed to do, then we can reevaluate. So what went wrong? Was there lack of understanding in the process? Did we miss it somewhere? And then once we do the analysis and find out that, oh, it wasn't a function of the training, it was a function of the trained person, we can now assimilate where did you miss it and all that. So the analysis happens, and then we can take a concrete decision. But usually that's how we measure it against what is expected and what is achieved.
Amazing. I like how that's very practical. It looks at both the outcomes and also whether it's the actual specific participants who are grasping it or not. So we only have a few more minutes left. So again, if you're in the audience and you have any specific questions you would pose to our two esteemed panelists today, please feel free to type them in. Otherwise, Nicholas and Chibuzo, do you have any additional comments or questions for each other that you'd like to raise or highlight before we wrap up today?
Okay, one of the things I'm going to say is, I know that there's a quest, right, to look for a particular learning and development plan and all that, but I always say it should be tailored, because there's vast information out there. There are resources online, panels, a lot of things. But to be honest, you just have to find what suits your organization. Understand, because, for example, if you're training your managers on emotional intelligence, and at the point, that's not where the business is going to, you'll be wasting time and resources, right? So you have to understand, at the end of the day, how does it feed into the North Star of the business? For every training, for every practice, for every process you're adopting, how does it fall into the business objective? Because at the end of the day, that's how we pay salaries, that's how we become star employers and all that. So understand, always speak to the executive, the stakeholders of the business. What are your pain points? What is success for the company at this time? Once you understand that, then it can help you tailor the kind of training and learning priorities that you can draft for the business.
Very well said. It's definitely our role is to make sure we're delivering, a unique and specific custom experience to the teams to add value. Thanks so much for articulating that so clearly. Nicholas, anything else to add from your side?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of continuous learning. I believe, learning is not an event. As much as we plan for it, it's not an event. We need to think of how can we reinforce a culture of continuous learning within our organizations, that people feel the need to develop themselves even before the business comes to support their own development. And that could happen in many creative ways, where you encourage people to share learnings whenever they are, say, those weekly regular check-ins or SLT meetings. Just have always that moment of learning for people to share before you go into the core of the business, so that it becomes top of mind. It becomes an everyday thing as a learning organization. So I think for me, that's really, really key. Then it becomes very, very easy to fill in the gaps that are there when it comes to now strengthening the other areas where we're not really strong at. And then secondly is, even as HR people, we need to try and ensure that we finalize all our capability plans before the budgeting cycle. Because then if we wait for the budgets to be signed off, then we'll always be running behind time. Yeah. So if we are able to identify those early enough, it helps us anticipate how much we will be asking of the business, not that we are asking extra money once the budgets have been signed. It really just helps us, stay more focused and even more efficient with our planning. And then lastly, I think to Chibuzo's point, always apply monitoring and evaluation in all your programs, because that really helps you assess the level of effectiveness and whether the real intention of that particular intervention was achieved, or it was misaligned, or it was missed. So if you don't ask the question, okay, so what? We have these 10 managers for a coaching intervention. So what? How will this help deliver for the business, and how will it help them move to the next level? What are we really measuring? So if you don't apply that measured approach, then it will be just, one of those very easy areas to be cut off. When things really get thick, most companies cut off the training budget very quickly. We don't need to give them that opportunity to cut it off. Once we are already a step ahead of the game, then learning will always be a top priority. Nobody will ever touch it, because we are applying the right gear, we are applying the right assessments, and we can justify the reason why we are doing what we do, because it is so critical for the business to succeed. Without people upskilled, reskilled, it's very difficult for the business to achieve anything going forward. So I think it's something that we need to keep as a continuous conversation with our managers and make it a culture of continuous learning within our organizations.
Amazing. Both of you saved some gems for the last part of the panel, and it definitely sounds like both of you sharing some hard-earned lessons that you're graciously sharing with us today. We are short on time. We have about 2 minutes. We did get one last question from the audience that I'll pose to you for some quick fire responses. Elizabeth from Sort Agile in Kenya mentions that the challenge she has seen with soft skills development with middle management is that the company culture is not aligned and basic inefficiencies are not eliminated. So how do people coordinate the operational efficiency with people development? So if I had to rephrase that, maybe to implement some of these L&D initiatives, it requires others to coordinate that. So maybe Chibuzo, have you run into this type of challenge, and how have you maybe mitigated or overcome it? And Nicholas will also quickly get to you as well.
Okay, so I'll just be quick, right? I manage people and culture for Bankley, and then culture is simply what we allow, right? Culture is simply what we allow, and I keep saying it. So why I mentioned that was because she said company culture is not aligned with basic inefficiencies and not eliminated, right? So at the core of culture is what we allow. So if we are allowing certain things to slide, right, or allowing certain level of inefficiencies, it's going to keep happening. But then when we call them out and address them and keep talking to people about what we want, right, that's on the operational efficiency part. What I'm trying to say in quote is, if you are trying to coordinate operational efficiency with people management, is if we're doing what we are supposed to do and the business is not allowing anything out of that, it would curb the time that we spend on managing certain things, and then you can effectively carry out your responsibilities. So I'll just give a quick example. I know that the time is up. For example, you're in a team and people come late, right? There's already something wrong in that system, and you're a manager, you're accepting that people can come late, right? When I see certain things like that and you don't call it out or manage people to help them understand that coming late is not just an activity, but it also affects the work that you do. If you don't manage that, it's also going to affect the work. So constantly changing things that are not supposed to be would eventually tie them into operational efficiency. That's how you can manage it. I don't know if that helped, Elizabeth. I hope it did. But
Awesome. That was very insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And to know you were the first one to show up today. So I know meeting attendance on time is something
oh, no,
you have.
it's fine. As far as we're sharing knowledge, it's okay.
Awesome. Nicholas, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah. I can't agree more. I think the other thing I would say, culture mainly is very nimble. So I would say get top leadership sponsorship. Get someone at the top to sponsor it, whether that's your CEO or someone who can really help influence some behavior shift, because that's really what you need. When you're doing it right from the operational level, the tactical level, it might be very difficult, and especially if the culture is already messed up at the top. So get where the mess is to lead the transformation. Get them to run with some of these things. I know in Uganda, we actually got some of our leaders to start now, talking the language that we would otherwise be the ones talking. But, they got to own up their teams. They got to identify the skills gaps. They got to help us identify where the solutions are. They got to assign those particular trainings and assess and follow through. So identify where the problem is and turn that problem to be their problem by letting them own it, and then you facilitate how that goes through.
Amazing. Thank you both, panelists Nicholas and Chibuzo. It was wonderful hearing from both of you about how you approach L&D at your companies and what some of the priorities are and some of the learnings that you've had along the way. So that will be the end of today's session. Today's session has been recorded, and I'll be sharing that out in the coming days to those who RSVP. So thanks again. And when it comes to Coffee Chat, again, we have various coaching options, including our peer coaching network, which allows you to have similar conversations like we had today with peers in a structured way to learn from each other and make sure that the solutions that you develop are customized to your own setting and your own team. So don't hesitate to reach out, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thanks again, and good night.
Thank you so much, Chris, for hosting us.
You're welcome.